What if humanity is not moving toward one future, but two? In 2026, a strange idea is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. It is sometimes called the Great Separation. The idea is simple, yet deeply unsettling. Humanity may continue living on the same planet, under the same sky, surrounded by the same oceans and cities. And yet, people may begin experiencing completely different realities. One path is said to lead toward fear, conflict, division, and control. The other toward awareness, compassion, connection, and what spiritual communities describe as awakening. But there is one question we need to ask before we accept any of this. Is humanity really approaching some kind of cosmic separation? Or is something much more subtle already happening? Something inside our minds, our beliefs, and the way we perceive reality itself? Because perhaps the most disturbing possibility is not that Earth is about to split into two worlds. Perhaps we're already living in different versions of the same one. On August 13, 2026, a new message published by Arrow of Light described what it called a great separation. According to the spiritual interpretation, the separation is not necessarily a physical event. There may be no explosion, no destruction of Earth, no giant spacecraft appearing in the sky. Instead, the separation is described as something people gradually experience through their consciousness. Some people may become increasingly focused on fear, conflict, control, and survival. Others may move toward compassion, awareness, inner freedom, and what is often described as a higher state of consciousness. In this worldview, humanity is not necessarily being separated geographically. It is being separated by the way people experience reality. And this is where the story becomes fascinating, because the idea of humanity moving toward different realities is not new. For years, spiritual communities have spoken about concepts such as a shift from three-dimensional consciousness to five-dimensional consciousness, the new Earth, timeline shifts, and the separation of different levels of human awareness. But what exactly do these terms mean? And more importantly, is there anything real behind them? When people hear the phrase, two different worlds, they often imagine something physical, two Earths, two planets, or humanity literally being divided into different dimensions. But that is not necessarily what the idea means. In spiritual teachings, the so-called third dimension or 3D consciousness is often associated with fear, survival, conflict, attachment, and control. The so-called fifth dimension or 5D consciousness is described very differently. Compassion, connection, awareness, inner freedom, and a sense that humanity is moving beyond old patterns of fear and division. So perhaps the phrase two worlds does not actually mean two planets. Perhaps it means two ways of experiencing the same planet. Imagine two people standing in the exact same city. They see the same buildings, the same news, the same political events, the same problems, and yet one person sees a world that is collapsing, while the other sees a civilization going through transformation. Same planet, same moment, completely different reality. According to these spiritual teachings, humanity may be approaching a crossroads. One path represents what some call the old world, a world dominated by fear, division, conflict, control, constant competition, and the endless struggle to survive. The other path represents something completely different: awareness, compassion, connection, inner freedom, and a growing desire to question the systems and beliefs that have shaped human civilization for generations. Some spiritual messages describe this as two different tracks. One track continues repeating old patterns. The other moves toward a new form of consciousness. And this leads to an unsettling thought. Perhaps the separation is not happening somewhere above us. Perhaps it is happening inside us. Every day, people make choices based on what they believe is real, what they fear, what they trust, what they reject, and what they are willing to question. So if humanity really is separating, perhaps the first place to look is not the sky, it is the human mind. But if this idea has existed for years, why does it feel so relevant now? Why are people in 2026 talking more than ever about consciousness, awakening, alternative realities, and humanity reaching some kind of turning point? Part of the answer may have nothing to do with extraterrestrials or higher dimensions. Our world has changed dramatically. Artificial intelligence is transforming how we receive information. Social media has created enormous information bubbles. Two people can search for the same event and receive completely different explanations. Two people can watch the same video and walk away believing completely different things. One person sees evidence of progress. Another sees evidence of collapse. One sees technology as liberation. Another sees it as control. And something even stranger is happening. Algorithms can increasingly determine what each person sees, which stories appear, which opinions are repeated, which fears are amplified, and which ideas disappear from view. So perhaps we do not need a cosmic event to create different realities. Perhaps technology has already given us the ability to experience different versions of the same world. But is that what spiritual teachings are talking about? Or are they describing something much deeper? This is where we need to slow down and separate belief from evidence. The concepts of three-dimensional and five-dimensional consciousness are widely used in modern spiritual communities, but they are not scientifically established measurements showing that human beings are physically moving from one dimension into another. There is currently no scientific evidence that humanity is splitting into two physical realities. No confirmed evidence that Earth is transitioning from 3 dimensions into 5, and no scientific proof that some people are literally moving onto a different timeline. These are spiritual and metaphysical interpretations, and that distinction matters, because there's a difference between saying, "This is a spiritual belief," and saying, "This is scientifically proven." But there is still an interesting question hiding underneath the idea. Even if there is no physical 3D to 5D transition, can human beings experience radically different versions of reality? Psychology tells us that perception is deeply influenced by beliefs, expectations, emotions, memories, and the information we consume. In other words, two people can experience the same world and construct very different realities from it. And suddenly, the great separation becomes much more interesting. Imagine two people waking up on the same morning. They open their phones. They read the news. They watch the same global events unfold. But their reactions could not be more different. One says, "Everything is falling apart." The other says, "Humanity is changing." One sees chaos. The other sees transformation. One sees fear. The other sees opportunity. Neither person has necessarily left Earth. Neither has entered another dimension. They are standing on the same planet, but they are experiencing it through completely different internal worlds. And perhaps this is the most realistic interpretation of the Great Separation. Not two planets, not two physical Earths, but two increasingly different ways of interpreting existence. The spiritual community may call this a consciousness shift. Psychology may describe it as perception. Technology companies might describe it as personalization. But whatever name we give it, the result can be surprisingly similar. People begin living inside different versions of reality. But there is a darker possibility. What happens when people no longer agree on what reality itself looks like? Imagine a world where two people can look at the same event and receive completely different information about it. Different headlines, different videos, different explanations, different communities telling them what to believe, different algorithms deciding what they should see next. One person is constantly shown evidence that the world is becoming more dangerous. Another is shown evidence that humanity is entering a new age of progress. One becomes more afraid, the other becomes more hopeful, and eventually, they may begin living in completely different psychological worlds. No portal is required. No spacecraft is required. No cosmic explosion. The separation can happen silently, through information, through belief, through fear, through algorithms, and through the human tendency to search for evidence that confirms what we already believe. Perhaps that is what makes this idea so unsettling. Because if two people can stand on the same planet, look at the same world, and see two completely different realities, then maybe the great separation does not need to happen in the future. Maybe it has already begun. Which world are we choosing to create? Because if humanity truly is approaching a great separation, the dividing line may not be somewhere in the universe. It may be inside each of us. This is the crystal mind. We first listen to the story. Then we discover what is really behind it.